بلد الخير أفريقيا أمنا سوداني أصلي ودي الهوية الفي وبتلمنا متعددين أعراق أديان ألوان وسحنات حضارات ثقافات نتكلم كمية لغات شعب الطيبة والإحساس إكرام الناس أساس مرحب بك وبتحلى القعدة بالزولل والناس مزيك تلامست وداني حرم ما بنرجع تاني نبنيه بالتفاني بالحرية بالأماني أي مواطن يطمئن بالسلام ويبقى راضي كل اللاجئين والنازحين استرجعوا الأراضي في ظل وطن بشيلنا حدادي ومدادي نعمل عشان نتقدم نتعلم من الماضي شرق غريب شمال جنوب كلنا أخوان نعيش رغم اختلافنا ما بنتفرق مهما كان نرفع إيقاع حياتنا ونعزف الألحان نريد حب مكان ونفخر بيك يا سودان.
Hello and welcome to episode 35 of Afrikanists Assemble. This month, we asked our contributors to ponder African thought and thinkers by asking them all the following question. What is one African theory, theoretician, or philosophy that you think has great potential for applying to research or education, and why? Let's see what kind of interesting answers they came up with.
Dhana moja ya kifalsafa ambayo ninaamini ina uwezo mkubwa wa kutumika katika utafiti na elimu ni Ubuntu. Ubuntu ni neno la Kibantu la Kinginguni ambalo linaweza kutafsiriwa kwa ufupi kama mimi ni kwa sababu sisi ni au utu kwa wengine. Ni falsafa inayosisitiza uhusiano wa karibu kati ya binadamu na umuhimu wa jamii na ina uwezo mkubwa wa kuleta mabadiliko chanya katika sekta ya elimu na utafiti. Katika elimu, Ubuntu inaweza kutumiwa kuboresha mbinu za kufundisha na kujifunza. Badala ya kujikita kwenye ushindani wa kibinafsi, tunaweza kuhimiza ushirikiano na uwajibikaji wa pamoja miongoni mwa wanafunzi. Hii inaweza kufanywa kupitia miradi ya kikundi na njia za tathmini zinazothamini uwezo wa kufanya kazi pamoja. Katika utafiti, Ubuntu inaweza kuongoza maadili na mbinu za utafiti. Tunaweza kuhimiza utafiti unaoshirikisha jamii zaidi, ambapo wanajamii ni washiriki hai katika mchakato mzima. Pia tunaweza kulenga zaidi kwenye utafiti unaotatua changamoto za kijamii na kuhakikisha matokeo yanasambazwa kwa njia inayofaa na yenye manufaa kwa jamii husika. Ubuntu pia inaweza kuboresha uongozi wa taasisi za elimu na utafiti. Tunaweza kuunda mifumo ya kufunza maamuzi inayojumuisha sauti za wadau wote na kugawanya rasilimali kwa njia inayozingatia mahitaji ya jamii nzima. Kwa kufuata misingi ya Ubuntu, tunaweza kujenga mfumo wa elimu na utafiti uliojumuishi zaidi, wenye maadili na unaozingatia manufaa ya jamii nzima. Hii itasaidia kuunda jamii yenye mshikamano zaidi na inayoweza kukabiliana na changamoto za kisasa kwa ufanisi zaidi. Tuna jukumu la kufikiri jinsi tunaweza kuingiza falsafa ya Ubuntu katika shughuli zetu za kila siku za elimu na utafiti. Tukifanya hivyo, tunaweza kuleta mabadiliko chanya katika jamii zetu na ulimwengu kwa jumla. Asante.
An African theory I feel can easily be applied to research or education is the Snail-Sense feminism theory, propounded by Akachi Adimora-Ezeigbo. Akachi Adimora-Ezeigbo is one of the many great feminists in Nigeria of West Africa. Her brand of feminism aims at proposing a survival strategy for Nigerian and most African women who live in patriarchal system. So the Snail-Sense feminism is an Afrocentric proposition which targets a non-combative or non-aggressive approach for eradication of male dominance and female subjugation in Africa. Akachi's Snail-Sense feminism could be said to be a reaction to earlier feminist theories like humanism, modernism, and so on. Snail-Sense feminism theory, as an African indigenous theory, proposes that women should adopt snail-like patience and efficiency in negotiating their ways around what Akachi metaphorically refers to as boulders, rocks, thorns, cracks, and rough terrains. I guess the theory is conceived from this philosophy of An Igbo adage which says, "Iroma ka ejula ji aga n'ogwu." It is with a good tongue that a snail walks on thorns. The snail, as an animal, has the nature of moving in a cleverly, skillfully, gentle, but bold manner. It is resilient in nature. The snail moves in a subtle manner. The assertive nature of the snail, which is devoid of aggressiveness, is what Snail-Sense feminism advocates. Snail-Sense feminist theory does not imply sluggishness. It does not imply timidity or cowardice, as most critics of this theory claim. Rather, it proposes a bold but consistent, assertive, and nonviolent approach for women in gaining enabling environment to be in charge of their world. It proposes a dignifying method for women emancipation or empowerment. Despite the criticism on Snail-Sense feminism theory, it can be seen as a potential tool in the search for better means of addressing the numerous social ills in our present-day society. It could go for a potential framework in both textual and real-life investigative studies. Application of the Snail-Sense theoretical framework in research could lead to the modification of the earlier version and give birth to a new theory. In fact, a theory of this nature and its method cannot be easily ignored or disregarded in our time, where we have come to see that incursion or violence has not proved to be the best option for conflict resolution in our time.
Mimi napendelea fikra za mwanafalsafa Dismas Masolo aliyezaliwa Kenya na anayesomesha katika idara ya falsafa kwenye chuo kikuu cha Louisville huku Marekani. Nimevutiwa sana na mawazo yake kwa namna mbili hasa. Ya kwanza ni kwamba ana tabia ya kuona mwanafalsafa katika mwandishi. Hapa nafikiria mawazo yake kuhusu mwandishi wa Tanzania wa Kiswahili, Shaban Robert. Nimewahi kwa mfano kumsikia Daktari Masolo kuzungumzia falsafa ya riwaya ya kusadikika ya Shaban, na niliiona hoja yake hushawishi. Alilinganisha mawazo ya Shaban Robert pale kwenye mwanzoni mwa riwaya na mawazo ya Plato katika Allegory of the Cave yake. Sijui nisemeje kwa Kiswahili, nadhani mafumbo ya pango. Na nimeyapenda sana maelezo yake kwa namna yalivyonipa mawazo mapya. Na kiujumla, nadhani wazo lake la kwamba tuwachukulie waandishi wa ubunifu kama vile Shaban kuwa pia wanafalsafa lina thamani sana katika kutafsiri fasihi na vile vile katika kusomesha. Pia Daktari Masolo ana tabia ya kuizingatia lugha tunayoitumia kujenga na kuzungumzia ujuzi. Na nadhani fikra zake hapa ni nzuri na za kushawishi sana. Katika kitabu chake cha Self and Community in a Changing World, Professor Masolo anatoa mfano wa mwalimu wake wa fizikia aliposoma kwenye shule ya sekondari na namna mwalimu huyu alivyokuza ufahamu kwa kueleza kwa kutumia lugha iliyokuwa lugha wazi kwa wanafunzi wake. Lugha iliyoeleweka kabisa. Masolo katika kumkumbuka mwalimu huyu anataja jambo kwamba yeye Masolo analoita the ordinariness of understanding, yani kawaida ya ufahamu. Na nadhani hiyo ni wazo lenye maana kwa utafiti na kwa kuelimisha pia.
My favorite African philosophy is that of Ọmọlúwàbí. It's used to describe someone with good character. The word is morphologically made up of Ọmọ tí Olúìwà bí. This literally translates separately with Ọmọ meaning child, Tí meaning that or which, Olúìwà meaning the chief of character, and Bí meaning born. With a combination of this, Ọmọlúwàbí translates as the child begotten by the chief of character. The Ọmọlúwàbí philosophy signifies courage, hard work, humility, and respect. As an Ọmọlúwàbí, I mind my business while treating everyone with respect. I try to fulfill my commitments while not shying away from rejecting whatever contradicts my beliefs. Integrity sums up an Ọmọlúwàbí character.
If a theory is a systematic and structured framework that explains and predicts phenomena or events, it is a well-substantiated explanation for a set of phenomena, often based on a combination of observations, experiments, and reasoning. Mine would then not be a theory per se, but it would be a lens through which we can look at phenomena. And my choice is Afrocentricity by Molefi, Professor Molefi, Kete, Asante. And he focuses on African cultures, experiences, and perspectives as a central point of reference for understanding the world. It could be education, it could be economics, it could be government, it could be politics. What Afrocentricity tends to do is not to replace, it's not to use an Eurocentric perspective, but an Afrocentric perspective that stands on its own and has its own legs and has its own methodology. So I would go down with Afrocentricity because we can look at history, we can look at the past from a totally Afrocentric perspective. And that is exactly why we talk about aesthetics. There are aesthetic values that are basically African. And it does not mean that we have to borrow the lens of the West in order to understand some of the things we do. Our artworks, even the educational system. It does not really have to be from a Western perspective. Now, what are the pedagogical techniques that Africans use? What is the worldview of the African? How do we see the world is what I would want to talk about, and that would be my choice, so that when you're looking at education or you're looking at finances, we can actually base our research and the lens through which we're looking at the phenomenon with an Afrocentric perspective. That would be my choice. And I think I've given the reason why, because it allows that multiplicity or multi-perspectival approach to situations, as opposed to the narrow gauge of looking at how the West does research. And you know that there is a question of the reductionist perspective of the West, where you study the units in order to understand the whole. From the African perspective and the Afro perspective, it is the whole that you want to understand. It is the whole you want to heal when there is illness. So it is not borrowing one for the other. It is instituting the African-centric way and mode of research.
Frantz Fanon analyzed the psychological effects of colonialism on the colonized people and the need for authentic decolonization. He talks about colonialism and the use of violence and marginalization as having destroyed the cultures and identities of the natives. He offers an analysis of the effects of colonization and the marginalization that the natives were subjected to with and through violence. That Fanon points out that here that the settlers reduced the natives to a level of superior monkeys to justify the need to dominate them, and also to justify their violent treatment of these natives. Violence, in Fanon's view, was not just meant to keep the natives at a distance, but also to dehumanize them. Violence, therefore, was employed to wipe out traditions, to substitute our language for theirs, to destroy their culture without giving them ours. The natives' land, in this case, was also taken, and they were subjected to flogging, to work on land, and they were starved and brainwashed. It is really hard to talk about the situation in Africa, for example, the violence and all that violence that has become an unending cycle for the last decades, because it is difficult to talk about it without looking at colonialization. If you look at the texts that come out, even the literary text, because that is where I'm based in literature, the literary text that we study there is always some kind of a form of violence that is being discussed in this text. It has become as a subject of literary writing and all that. If it's not genocide, for example, the case of Rwanda, if it's not civil war in South Sudan, in Burundi, if it's not post-election violence like in Kenya, all kinds of violence have been shown to have a root cause, that the root cause of this violence is tied to colonialization. And therefore, all these texts, for example, if you take a text like Asante at the pool in Kigali, it clearly shows that the ills of colonialization and how those therefore translated to the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. Therefore, it is really hard to talk about violence in Africa without looking at colonialization and what that colonization meant for the people. And that is the reason why I think Fanon's post-colonial theory is very important in research.
Ku tirhisa ku pima ka chavisana ngopfu ndzeni ka vutlhari. Kuma leswaku vadyondzi vonge va tiva ngopfu ku pala van'wana, kambe swa twala leswo ni mavonelo man'wana. Ku tirhisa ku pima a ku hambani ni leswi hinkwavo vanhu va mahaka siku ni siku. Loko ni twa ndhuma ya ku va kona va lavaka ku susa mfumo matiko lowu karhi Afrika, ni nga ku a ku na musi lowu kalaka ndzilo. I nga leswi lavaka ku vula ku ku fanele ku hi tivonela. Ni tirhisa ntolovelo ni ku hlola ku ni ta hlamusela matshamelo ya mchumu. Loko vhela mfumo wu susiwa, ni ta swi kota ku teka biko leri ku lita ni pfuna ku hlamusela ni ku vumba leswi ngota. Ku tirhisa ku pima ku fana ni ku patsanyisa nhloko ya mhaka ni lomu hi taku hi kona. Leswi swi lava ku vula leswaku hi kombisa ku swi mahisa ku yini ku timhaka ti komba swa ku leyi hi nhloko ya mhaka ya kona. Anduma ya ku va ta susa mfumo, ku kala ku tsaka ni mfumo ni swin'wana i swilo leswi swi kombaka ku swi lava xingove xi dibe micovela. Ku tirhisa ku pima hi koho ku mahaka leswaku hi swi kota ku hlamusela matshamelo ya mchumu, ku swi tiva swa ku ha ma hlamusela matshamelo, ni ku hi swi kota ku vona swa ku hi hina hi tswalaka ku kanganyiseka ka ku misava a yi paluxiwi hi hina. Kutani ku tirhisa ku pima i ku teka ntolovelo wa hina wa misava ku hi ta pima misava leyi hi nga yi tswala tolo kumbe mundzuku. Se ina mintirhisi ku pima yo hlamalisa hi ntamu ndzi yi tivaka mina ndzeni ka vutivi la mahanyelo ya moya yi kumeka utlharini. Hi ririmi la mina yi nga Xitsonga hi u hi dlisi xitsivi, swi lavaka ku vula leswaku u hi tlulisile timhaka ta tikulu hi xihatla. Hi mavonelo ya mina, leswi i nhlamuselo wa ku tirhisa ku pima mayelana ni swa ku vona matshamelo ya minchumu loko se hi chusekile kumbe loko hi lava ku chuseka nhlokweni. Ku lava hi susa ku hlamalisa ka ku tirhisa ku pima loko hi lava ku kuma ku tirhisa ku pima loku ka ku tlula un'wana. Ndzeni ka vutivi vo fundaka swa Afrika, hi nge swi koti ku maha leswi hi mfanelo wa kona loko hi nga hlayisi vutlhari wa siku ni siku.
The Ubuntu theory, I am because you are, clearly stands out as a big theory that mirrors the common denominator among Africans, communality. Through the persistent emphasis on Ubuntu, it has now become a highly recognized theory in the academic space, as well as, in some cases, it is being incorporated in classrooms and all that. However, there are many other theories apart from Ubuntu that equally serve to bind Africans together and to ensure that the African identity is intact, or perhaps where there is a shortcoming, it is actively restored. And one of such is the Sankofa theory that has originated from the Adinkra people in Akan tribe of Ghana, West Africa. Sankofa theory seems to me like a call to not forget the past identity, experiences, and overall history of the African people in the bid all right, to progress and attain future goals. It is a theory that binds the past to the future and calls, saying something like, look back to move forward. Sankofa theory, I believe, is a theory that should be incorporated in the talk about decolonization in Africa, even to the point of the secondary school and especially when we talk about history, right? There are many upsurges on, decolonize culture, decolonize religion, spirituality, education, fashion, makeup, and many other things like that. I feel this theory is so relevant because it's more like a theory that is saying that if we do not know where we have come from, how we used to be, we cannot decolonize from the present because we do not know where to return to. We do not know who we used to be, all right? We don't know where to return to because we don't know who we used to be. And the knowledge of who we used to be is what can assist us in understanding where we are and where we need to detach and why we need to detach from it into a better representation of who we need to be.
This question is a very good one because it recognizes the fact that we have gone past the era of asking if there is an African philosophy and what is African philosophy by putting us in a position where we need to think of African philosophies that have great potential for applying to research or education, and why. There are many African philosophies, but the most outstanding for me is the Ubuntu philosophy. The Ubuntu philosophy is one that is born out of the way of life of the African people, especially the Southern Africans, but was popularized by Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu because of its relevance to the society. It is derived from the Zulu phrase, Umuntu, Ngumuntu, Ngabantu, which means that one is only a person through other people. And to use the words of Chris Abani, it suggests that the only way for me to be human is for you to reflect my humanity back at me. Thus, it recognizes we have a shared humanity that enables intersubjectivity, which is the need to have a self-other relation that entails treating the other much like a human being and the other reciprocating. The reason Ubuntu philosophy has great potential for applying to research or education is strongly rooted in its emphasis on our shared humanity and interconnectedness. The Ubuntu philosophy promotes the affirmation of the other's existence, such that the other is treated like a human being with dignity, irrespective of color. To understand this point vividly, one can take a look at the picture of George McLaurin at the University of Oklahoma in 1948, being isolated in a classroom because he was a person of color. And this happened because of the absence of Ubuntu, which must not be neglected in education. Also, the Ubuntu philosophy allows not just the validation of the individual, but the development of the individual as a human being, and at the same time builds and encourages the individual's capacity to collaborate with other human beings, which is a very good and vital aspect of research. Again, the Ubuntu philosophy encourages the sharing of knowledge. This will make it possible for us to perceive reality from an intercultural perspective, such that no philosophy or culture is considered the one and only true reality.
For me, a great African thinker at the moment is Souleymane Bachir Diagne, a philosopher from Senegal, and his idea of the so-called lateral or also horizontal universal. So his idea is that firstly, we need to give up or get away from the idea that all universal terms are Western. So universals are terms like religion, literature, politics, for instance. And then they are imposed on other regions like Africa, so that Africa is only has particular terms, so African religion, African literature, African politics, whereas the West, in a sense, owns the universal, the more general kind of term. So what Diagne suggests is to get away from this vertical notion of power or of a hierarchy. And if you give up the West as a center, you basically arrive on a horizontal plane where languages encounter other languages and where one can start thinking from an African language and also through a plurality of languages. So basically one translates from language to language. So religion, then one would need to think how this actually translates into Wolof, or starting from Wolof, what religion is in Wolof and how it translates into Fulfulde, and how these terms in a sense trouble each other, enrich each other. So translation is an enriching kind of exercise. And here he has been greatly inspired by another great African thinker, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who says that translation is the language of language, and the thinking back and forth between African languages, that's the enriching part, because there's an emphasis then put on the specific concepts, the specific affordances of African languages, which I find very inspiring also for the recalibrating project. The other inspiring thing is that for Diagne, it's very important to not consider languages in isolation. So decolonization cannot mean to cut all bridges and to kind of construct inert storehouses of value, but particularly to put an emphasis on constant dialogue, so that the universal is a building site that we all engage in. And that I find a very kind of freeing idea of how to get away from Western hierarchies, how to put an emphasis on language and languages, and how to also emphasize the conceptual depth of all languages basically in the world without making any difference.
One of the African philosophies that have great potential for apply to research or education, I think, is the Yoruba philosophy of Ọmọlúwàbí. The theory of Ọmọlúwàbí holds significant potential when applied to research and education. Applying Ọmọlúwàbí in research promotes ethical conduct among researchers. It encourages honesty, respect for participants, and integrity in data collection and reporting, thereby ensuring the credibility and reliability of research findings. The concept of Ọmọlúwàbí emphasizes community and social responsibility. This can translate into programs encouraging students to engage with and give back to their communities. By incorporating Ọmọlúwàbí principles into educational curricula, students can develop strong moral values and ethical behavior. The emphasis on character building can create a generation of individuals prioritizing integrity and responsibility in their personal and professional lives. Ọmọlúwàbí fosters a holistic approach to education that goes beyond academic excellence. It integrates moral and ethical education, ensuring students are well-rounded individuals who can contribute positively to society. Ọmọlúwàbí can be used to cultivate leadership qualities in students by instilling values such as respect, responsibility, and ethical decision-making. Educational institutions can prepare students to become effective and moral leaders through the philosophy of Ọmọlúwàbí. In summary, the principles of Ọmọlúwàbí can enhance the ethical standards of research, promote holistic education, and foster a positive and inclusive academic environment. Thank you.
I would like to bring to light Pauline Utunji on African philosophy, myth, and reality. His work centered on the attempt to answer the debate whether there is an African philosophy or not. Although intellectual discourse on its existence have been overflowed by different scholars both in Africa and the diaspora who have posited different views on the debate. However, we could see the implication permeating recent discourse in research and in the educational system in general. A myth is an unreal representation of the empirical world. They issue from imagination, fancies, and framed up imageries, which try to posit a world that, though appear real, is the counterfeit of the real, or often the wish of the person making up the myth. According to Pauline Otunji, African philosophy is both a myth and reality, which he addressed from the perspective that it is a myth to the extent that it has not properly articulated its self-conscious framework that is autonomously African. However, on the other hand, he firmly asserts that African philosophy is a reality as a body of literature whose existence is undeniable. Otunji identifies a problematic, which is that African philosophy does not lie where we have been looking for it. For him, if it is found where we have been looking for it, it is a myth, and if found where it is a reality. And he argued that since African philosophy today is both sought where it is and where it is not, makes it both a myth and a reality. Otunji claimed to be showing a direction that there can be a transmutation from the mythical orientation of African philosophy to the realistic orientation. He argued that African philosophy is not in some mysterious corner of a supposedly immutable soul and unconscious worldview, which is incumbent on us to study and revive. For him, philosophy in general, and African philosophy in particular, consists essentially in the process of self-analysis, and as such needs to portray a positive image of the African identity in the educational system and on the global scene. We could deduce from his work by positing that African philosophy needs a free, rigorous dialectical discourse to be embarked upon by researchers.
One African philosophy or theory that has great potential for application to research or education is consistent experimentation and memorization. This theory of philosophy sustained Africans in agrarian era. They were useful in the preparation of their herbal mixture for medical remedies, local technologies, making of tools, textiles, boats, and orature. Consistent experimentation and memorization encouraged the progress Africans made before they had contact with other neighbors that may have influenced improvement due to exchange of ideas and knowledge on what they have. This theory of philosophy sustained the progress Africans made in the absence of documentation. Its applicability in recent time is very important because of the sources it has made in the past. Although documentation is very important, memorization is more important because it is within the memory for instant human application. Consistency and memorization are important factors that constitute essentials of good research or education that is capable of enhancing commitment to heart, resilience in research process, improvement in the volume of knowledge in the learner or researcher, and instant application of memorized knowledge.
For me, one African theory that I consider to be of great potential for applying to research or education is the African feminism theory. The theory has been widely employed from different perspectives by African and non-African scholars. African feminism theory addresses the specific experiences and struggles of African women. It emphasizes intersectionality and the importance of culture, tradition, and social structure in shaping gender dynamics. This theory set off in the early 20th century as women's rights activism across Africa, from places like Sierra Leone, South Africa, Algeria, Mozambique, Guinea, Angola, Kenya, and Nigeria, to mention a few. Its content includes sensitive aspects of cultural, social, and economic context of African women as a departure from Western feminism or feminist frameworks that may not be relevant or appropriate in African context. It respects and integrates indigenous knowledge system, values, and customs. Basically, this theory promotes the inclusion of African epistemologies and methodologies, enriching academic discipline with diverse perspectives and insights. As part of global movement, it contributes to global feminist discourses by offering insights into the unique struggles and resilience of African women. It fosters transnational solidarity and learning among feminist movements worldwide. Regarding its relevance to research methodologies, African feminism often advocates for participatory and community-based research methods that involve African women as co-researchers or collaborators. This approach ensures that research is grounded in the lived experiences and needs of the community. More importantly, this theory emphasizes ethical research practices that respect the dignity, rights, and contribution of African women. In conclusion, I will say African feminism can be applied to gender studies, sociology, anthropology, and development studies, including music, to analyze and address issues surrounding gender inequality, women's rights, and empowerment in African context.
Nimechagua kipengele cha falsafa katika kulijibu swali hili. Kwa hivyo nitatumia falsafa ya umoja na ushirikiano. Sisi wa Afrika huwa tunaaminiwa ama tunaamini kuwa sisi ni watu ambao tuna umoja na ushirikiano, na ndio maana tukawa na istilahi ama maneno mbalimbali ambayo yametujenga ama zimejenga misingi hii ya umoja na ushirikiano, kama vile harambee, ujamaa, udugu, ubuntu na kadhalika. Vile vile tunaamini kuwa kidole kimoja hakivunji chawa, na hivyo basi ili kufanikisha mambo ama shughuli zetu mbalimbali ni sharti tushirikiane na tushikamane. Ninafikiria kuwa falsafa hii itakuwa na uwezo mkubwa hasa katika naamini kuwa itakuwa na uwezo mkubwa kuitumia katika utafiti hata elimu, kwa sababu safari ya masomo ama utafiti kawaida sio rahisi. Hivyo ukitaka kufanikisha safari hii ama ukitaka kukamilisha kazi yako, lazima ushirikiane na watu, na kwenye kushirikiana na watu utapata mwongozo, utaelekezwa, na wakati mwingine pia utapata wanakupatia motisha. Hivyo naona kuwa falsafa hii ni muhimu sana. Asante, na natumai nimetoa mchango unavyostahili na nimejibu swali vilivyo. Shukran.
There are many African philosophies that have the potential for application to research. I will settle on Ubuntu philosophy. Ubuntu is a Bantu term denoting the significance of community, with synonyms as Botho in Setswana and Sesotho, Utu in Swahili, Unho in Shona, Ohanaeze in Igbo. Ubuntu stands out in designating Africans as individuals in community. For the African, to be human is to be with others. Ubuntu, therefore, underscores the supremacy of the community in offering relevance to the individual, even as the individual is a primary segment of the community and is responsible for its success. In my ethnic group, the Okwani of Delta State of Nigeria, Ubuntu is crafted in the expression, an individual cannot announce himself as we have come. This means that an individual's relevance is hinged on the significance of the community he hails from, and to which he will always be traced. Its rise or fall depends on his community. Ubuntu has a great potential for application to research, especially literary research, because it helps to explain the tragic consequences that befall the individual who contravenes its tenets. Ubuntu has a huge presence in what can be termed first-generation African literary works, which appropriate indigenous African cultures. For example, Ubuntu can be used to analyze Chinua Achebe's No Longer at Ease and Ugugu wa Thiong'o's Weep Not Child. With Ubuntu represented in Umuofia Progressive Unions granting scholarship to Obi Okonkwo, a member of Umuofia community, to go to the United Kingdom for further studies in No Longer at Ease, and then on the other side, Kamau and Kori pulling resources together to ensure Njoroge proceeds to secondary school in Weep Not Child, we seem to identify how members of the community display their relevance by contributing their fair share for an individual's achievement of his goals, in expectation of the individual's fair returns to the community after becoming successful. So by applying Ubuntu to the reading of these texts, interpretation focuses on the tenets held and sanctioned by the African community for the achievement of the community's common socioeconomic fortunes, realizable only in the achievement of the individual members' aspirations.
Those were all the contributions we received this month. What did you think of the theories, theoreticians, and philosophies they identified? Did you find any of them more interesting than others? How would you have answered the question? Tell us about it in the comments below. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Afrikanists Assemble. If it took you a while to see it, you might want to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss another episode. See you next time.
بكتب بدم الشهيد ببحث عن الفقيد عن اللي فات وراح وودع الفريق عن الخلل ثورة بلد تكتب وتسطر للبلد تكتب عن جنسي انظلم في وش الحاكم اتنفض قالوا الولف قتال قالوا الولف مصيبة كيف اقدر اني هاجر وامشي لي بلد غريبة اصارخ في ترابي يا بلد حبي غريزة ضيقي وزيدي في الألم صامد معك حقيقة بلدنا احلى بناسة اللمة والوناسة جلسة في مالك يا بلد تكفيني انها راحة مصدوم فيك يا بلد والفيكي فاط ورحل ولادك ميت غريبك ماخذ فيك رحته إلى البلد النيلة مطفق وناسع وطاشع رضينا بالمعيشة